There's a moment in every relationship where you catch yourself asking the question. Maybe it's late at night, staring at the ceiling. Maybe it's when they don't text back for hours and you feel that familiar knot in your stomach. Maybe it's when you're explaining them to a friend and you hear yourself making excuses. The question always sounds the same. Are they the one? Carl Jung, the pioneering psychologist who mapped the depths of human consciousness, would have stopped you right there. Not to give you relationship advice, but to point out something far more profound. If you have to ask, they're not the one. But Jung's insight goes deeper than surface-level dating wisdom. It cuts through the romantic fantasies, the ego-driven desires, and the projections we cast onto others, revealing a brutal truth about how we mistake emotional chaos for love, and why the soul always knows what the mind refuses to accept. Today we're going to explore Jung's understanding of relationships through the lens of the unconscious mind. We'll examine how your psyche communicates through intuition, why certainty feels different from hope, and how the anima and animus, those archetypal forces within us, create the very projections that blind us to authentic connection. This isn't just about relationships, it's about learning to trust the deepest part of yourself, the part that knows before you think, feels before you analyze, and recognizes truth in a way that transcends rational explanation. Jung believed that the unconscious mind communicates in symbols, dreams, and what he called feeling-toned complexes. But there's another language it speaks, the language of certainty. When something is aligned with your deepest truth, your psyche doesn't debate. It doesn't create endless mental loops or require constant validation from others. It simply knows. Think about the last time you experienced genuine certainty about anything in your life. Maybe it was a career decision that felt absolutely right, despite seeming risky on paper. Maybe it was a friendship that clicked immediately, without effort or pretense. Maybe it was a creative project that flowed from some deeper source. Notice what that certainty felt like. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't accompanied by butterflies or anxiety or the need to convince anyone, including yourself. It was quiet, steady, and unshakable, like a rock beneath shifting sand. Jung called this phenomenon feeling function, one of the 4 psychological functions that help us navigate reality. When the feeling function is operating clearly, it provides an immediate sense of value and significance. Not emotional reaction, but deep knowing. In relationships, this manifests as what Jung might call soul recognition. When you meet someone whose energy naturally complements yours, when conversation flows without effort, when silence feels comfortable rather than awkward, when their presence somehow makes you more yourself rather than less, your unconscious recognizes this harmony immediately. You don't have to ask if they're right for you because the question doesn't arise. Your whole system relaxes into alignment. But here's where it gets complicated. Most of us have been conditioned to mistake intensity for connection, drama for depth, and anxiety for attraction. We've learned to chase the very experiences that signal incompatibility, while overlooking the quiet resonance that indicates true alignment. Jung understood this pattern intimately. He spent decades studying how we project our own unconscious material onto others, creating elaborate fantasies that have more to do with our inner world than external reality. Every person carries within them what Jung called the anima, or animus, the unconscious feminine or masculine principle that seeks expression and completion. These aren't gender-based concepts, but archetypal energies that exist in everyone. The anima, for those with predominantly masculine psychology, represents the receptive, intuitive, emotional aspects of the psyche. The animus, for those with predominantly feminine psychology, embodies the active, rational, discriminating functions. When these inner figures are undeveloped or unconscious, we tend to project them onto others. We fall in love not with the person in front of us, but with our own disowned psychological material. This is why you can feel instantly attracted to someone who embodies qualities you haven't developed in yourself. The shy person falls for the confident extrovert. The rational thinker becomes obsessed with the emotional, spontaneous type. The people pleaser is drawn to the apparent rebel. But projection-based attraction always carries a specific signature. It feels urgent, consuming, and somehow incomplete. You find yourself constantly analyzing the relationship, seeking reassurance, trying to figure out where you stand. You feel like you're missing some crucial piece of information that, once obtained, will finally give you peace. Here's Jung's brutal insight. If you have to ask whether they're the one, you're probably in the grip of projection. You're trying to complete yourself through another person rather than recognizing a natural complementarity. Real compatibility, what Jung might call individuation-supporting partnership, doesn't create this kind of psychological urgency. It creates space. Space to be yourself, space to grow, space to explore your own depths without losing yourself in another person's energy field. When you meet someone who's genuinely compatible with your authentic self, the relationship doesn't consume your mental energy. It generates creative energy. You find yourself more inspired, more productive, more connected to your own purpose and vision. But this kind of partnership requires something most people aren't willing to face. You have to know yourself first. You have to have done enough inner work to distinguish between your own psychological material and what belongs to others. If you're still hoping someone else will complete you, make you feel whole, or solve your existential loneliness, every relationship becomes a desperate search rather than a natural unfolding. Before we go deeper into Jung's map of authentic relationship, I want to ask you something. If this perspective is resonating with you, if you're starting to see patterns in your own relationship history, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications because we explore these deeper psychological truths regularly. Not because I need the validation, but because engaging with content like this sends a signal to the algorithm that people are hungry for depth. It helps create a community of individuals committed to psychological honesty and genuine growth. Now, let's examine what Jung discovered about the difference between ego-driven desire and soul-level attraction. Jung made a crucial distinction between what he called ego love and what we might call soul love. This distinction explains why some relationships feel like constant work, while others feel like natural flow. Ego love is based on what the other person can do for you. It's driven by need, fear, and the unconscious belief that someone else holds the key to your happiness or completion. Ego love asks, what can you give me? How do you make me feel? Do you match my checklist? Will you stay? Will you choose me? The ego falls in love with images, projections, and potential. It becomes attached to how someone looks, their social status, how they make you appear to others, or the fantasy of who they might become. Ego love is always slightly anxious because it's built on external factors that could change or disappear. This is why ego love generates so many questions. The mind churns endlessly, trying to assess, predict, and control. Do they feel the same way? Are they seeing other people? What did that text mean? Where is this going? Are they the one? Soul love, by contrast, is based on recognition. It sees and appreciates the other person's essence, their authentic self beneath the masks and personas. Soul love doesn't need the other person to be anything other than what they are. It doesn't create elaborate improvement projects or try to reshape someone into an ideal partner. Jung believed that the soul recognizes what it needs for growth and individuation. When you encounter someone whose presence naturally supports your journey toward wholeness, your deeper self responds with quiet certainty. This doesn't mean soul love is always easy or without challenges, but the challenges feel creative rather than destructive. They invite you to grow, heal, and become more authentic rather than constantly defending, explaining, or compromising your core self. Here's how to recognize the difference. Ego love makes you smaller. You find yourself walking on eggshells, suppressing aspects of your personality, or becoming someone you think they want you to be. You lose touch with your own center because you're so focused on maintaining their interest or approval. Soul love makes you larger. You feel more like yourself, not less. Your creativity flows more freely. You take better care of yourself. You pursue your own interests with more passion. The relationship becomes a container for mutual growth rather than mutual diminishment. Jung understood that this kind of love requires what he called conscious participation. You can't just fall into it unconsciously and expect it to work. Both people must be committed to their own individuation process, the lifelong journey of becoming who they truly are. When two people who are actively engaged in their own psychological development come together, something magical happens. Instead of trying to complete each other, they create what Jung might call synergistic individuation. Each person's growth amplifies the others without either losing their essential self. But here's the part that most people resist. This kind of relationship can't be forced, manufactured, or achieved through techniques. It emerges naturally when you've done enough inner work to stop desperately seeking completion through others. This brings us to one of Jung's most important insights about relationships, the role of what he called divine discontent. Jung noticed that many people stay in relationships that drain their vital energy because they're afraid of what he called divine discontent, the sacred dissatisfaction that arises when your soul knows you're settling for less than what's possible. Divine discontent isn't ordinary unhappiness or the grass is greener syndrome. It's a deeper knowing that emerges from the self, Jung's term for the archetypal core of personality that seeks wholeness and authentic expression. When you're in a relationship that doesn't truly serve your individuation process, your unconscious begins sending signals. You might feel chronically tired despite getting enough sleep. You might find yourself fantasizing about different life scenarios. You might feel like you're wearing a mask that you can't quite remove. Your dreams might become populated with symbols of confinement or escape. You might find yourself increasingly drawn to activities, places, or people that your partner doesn't understand or appreciate. Your creative energy might feel blocked or redirected into maintaining a relationship that requires constant management. Most people interpret these signals as personal failings. They think something is wrong with them for not being satisfied with what looks good on paper. They judge themselves for wanting more when they should be grateful for what they have. But Jung understood divine discontent as the psyche's wisdom. It's your deeper self refusing to accept compromise at the level of soul. It's the part of you that knows you deserve and are capable of authentic love rather than elaborate compatibility. Here's what makes this particularly challenging in our culture. We've been taught to view relationships as achievements rather than organic unfoldings. We learn to make relationships work through communication skills, compromise and commitment, regardless of whether there's underlying resonance. Jung wasn't against commitment or working through challenges, but he distinguished between creative challenges that support growth and soul-draining challenges that arise from fundamental incompatibility. Creative challenges feel like growing edges. They invite you to develop new capacities, heal old wounds, or express aspects of yourself that have been dormant. Even when difficult, they carry a sense of rightness, of being called towards something larger. Soul-draining challenges feel like chronic friction. You find yourself having the same conversations repeatedly, without resolution. You feel like you're pushing a boulder uphill. You sense that you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, but you keep trying because you believe love should require sacrifice. Jung's insight: real love doesn't require you to sacrifice your essential self. It might ask you to grow beyond your current limitations, but it never asks you to betray your deepest nature. This is why the question, "Are they the one?" is so revealing. When someone is truly aligned with your path, the question doesn't arise because there's no internal conflict to resolve. Your mind isn't split between what you think you should want and what your soul actually recognizes as nourishing. But what about those times when you think you found the one and it doesn't work out? Jung had profound insights about this too, which brings us to one of his most important concepts: the difference between personal love and archetypal love. Jung observed that people often fall in love with archetypal energies rather than personal qualities. They become enchanted by someone who embodies the hero, the lover, the wise woman, the rebel, or the caretaker, without seeing the actual human being beneath the archetypal mask. Archetypal love feels mythic and destined. It carries a sense of fate, as if the universe conspired to bring you together. The person seems to embody everything you've been searching for. They feel like the missing piece of some cosmic puzzle. This kind of attraction can be incredibly powerful, but it's often based on unconscious material rather than conscious compatibility. You're responding to what they represent in your psyche, rather than who they actually are in daily life. Personal love, by contrast, sees and appreciates the individual beyond their archetypal presentation. It recognizes their quirks, limitations, and humanity without trying to change or idealize them. It's based on actual compatibility rather than symbolic resonance. Here's the crucial insight. Archetypal love often begins with the feeling that someone is the one. They seem perfect, destined, too good to be true. Personal love grows gradually as you discover genuine compatibility in values, lifestyle, communication style, and life vision. Jung understood that archetypal projections eventually collapse. The hero reveals their insecurities. The wise woman has moments of confusion. The rebel shows their need for security. When the archetypal mask falls away, many relationships end because there was nothing substantial beneath the projection. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of what he called seeing through, the ability to perceive others clearly rather than through the lens of your own psychological needs and fantasies. When you've developed this capacity, you stop falling in love with potential and start recognizing present moment reality. You see people as they are rather than as you need them to be. And paradoxically, this makes authentic connection possible. Someone who's truly compatible with you doesn't need to embody your projections. They don't need to be the perfect hero or the ideal lover. They just need to be themselves in a way that naturally harmonizes with your authentic self. This brings us to what might be the most challenging aspect of Jung's approach to relationships, the requirement for radical self-knowledge. Jung famously said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." He viewed relationships as mirrors that reflect our unconscious material back to us with startling clarity. When you're asking, "Are they the one?" you're often really asking, "Am I the one for myself?" The uncertainty you feel about them reflects uncertainty about your own worth, your own capacity for love, or your own readiness for the kind of partnership you claim to want. Think about this carefully. When you meet someone who's genuinely aligned with your authentic self, do you question whether you're good enough for them? Or do you naturally assume compatibility because you recognize yourself as worthy of love and respect? The people who trigger the most uncertainty in us are often those who mirror our own ambivalence about intimacy. They might be emotionally unavailable, which reflects our own fear of vulnerability. They might be inconsistent, which mirrors our own internal inconsistency about what we truly want. Jung believed that we're unconsciously drawn to people who will activate our unlived psychological material. The person who makes you question everything might be inviting you to heal something that needs attention, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're your life partner. Here's a profound realization. When you've done enough inner work to feel genuinely whole within yourself, you stop being attracted to people who create internal chaos. You start gravitating toward individuals who feel like home, rather than a thrilling adventure into the unknown. This doesn't mean you want someone boring or predictable. It means you're drawn to someone whose presence allows your own authentic self to emerge more fully. Someone who creates space for your growth, rather than constantly triggering your wounds. Jung called this conscious relationship, partnership between two individuals who have taken responsibility for their own psychological development and can therefore meet each other from a place of wholeness rather than neediness. In conscious relationship, you don't need to ask if they're the one because you're not looking for someone to complete you. You're looking for someone to share the journey of becoming more fully yourself. But here's what I want you to consider, and this might be the most important question you ask yourself today. What if the reason you keep asking, "Are they the one?" isn't actually about finding the right person, but about avoiding the deeper work of becoming the right person, the person who naturally attracts authentic love rather than chasing it? What if every time you felt uncertain about someone was actually your psyche, trying to tell you that you were settling for less than what your soul knows is possible? And what if the reason you haven't trusted that inner knowing is because trusting it would require you to face your own capacity for genuine intimacy? Think about it. Really think about it. Has there ever been a time when you ignored that quiet voice that said, "This isn't quite right," only to discover months or years later that the voice was trying to protect you from wasting precious time and energy on something that was never meant to last? Jung understood that one of the greatest challenges in life is learning to trust your own inner knowing, especially when it conflicts with social expectations or personal hopes. The part of you that knows whether someone is truly compatible operates at a level beneath conscious thought, and it's often the first casualty of our desire to make things work. When you meet someone who's genuinely aligned with your path, several things happen simultaneously. First, you feel more like yourself in their presence, not less. Second, you don't feel compelled to perform or present a curated version of who you are. Third, your nervous system relaxes rather than activates. Fourth, you find yourself naturally wanting to support their growth and happiness without losing sight of your own needs. Most importantly, you don't feel the need to convince them to choose you because you naturally assume that someone who's truly compatible will recognize the value of what you bring to the connection. This is what Jung meant by psychological maturity, the capacity to trust your own perceptions and respond authentically rather than reactively. It requires enormous courage because it means being willing to walk away from relationships that look good on paper but don't feel right at the soul level. Our culture often frames this as being picky or having unrealistic standards. But Jung would say it's actually about having realistic standards at the level of essence rather than surface compatibility. Think about the people in your life with whom you feel completely natural and at ease. Notice that with these individuals, you don't question whether they like you or where you stand. The relationship simply unfolds organically without drama or uncertainty. This same principle applies to romantic partnerships, but it requires you to distinguish between the excitement of pursuing someone who's ambivalent about you and the satisfaction of being chosen by someone who genuinely appreciates who you are. Jung believed that the individuation process, becoming who you truly are, naturally leads to attracting people who resonate with your authentic self. But this only works if you're willing to show up authentically rather than presenting a version of yourself designed to appeal to others. Here's the paradox. The more you try to be what you think someone else wants, the less likely you are to attract someone who actually wants you. And the more you're willing to be genuinely yourself, the more you naturally magnetize people who appreciate your authentic qualities. This brings us to Jung's most challenging insight about relationships. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone go who isn't truly aligned with your path, even if you care about them deeply. Jung understood that love and compatibility are not the same thing. You can genuinely care for someone while recognizing that building a life together would compromise both of your individual journeys toward wholeness. This is perhaps the most difficult truth about relationships. Caring for someone doesn't automatically mean you should be together. Sometimes the most loving act is acknowledging incompatibility and releasing each other to find more suitable partners. When you have to keep asking, are they the one? Your deeper self is usually trying to tell you that the answer is no. Not because there's anything wrong with either of you, but because genuine compatibility creates clarity, not confusion. The question itself reveals internal conflict. Part of you recognizes the mismatch, while another part hopes you can make it work through effort, compromise, or time. But Jung believed that the psyche's wisdom is usually correct about these fundamental assessments. This doesn't mean you should end every relationship at the first sign of challenge or uncertainty. It means learning to distinguish between growing pains that lead to deeper intimacy and chronic friction that indicates fundamental incompatibility. Growing pains feel creative. They invite you to heal, expand, or develop new capacities. Even when difficult, they carry a sense of movement toward greater wholeness. Chronic friction feels depleting. You find yourself becoming smaller, more defended, or less yourself. The challenges don't lead to growth but to chronic stress and diminishment of your vital energy. Jung's approach requires tremendous emotional intelligence and self-awareness. It asks you to trust your deeper knowing, even when it conflicts with your conscious desires or social expectations. But here's what he promised. When you develop the courage to honor your soul's wisdom about relationships, you create space for authentic love to enter your life. You stop settling for elaborate compatibility and become available for genuine resonance. The people who naturally complement your journey toward wholeness aren't hiding from you. They're simply waiting for you to stop chasing relationships that require you to abandon yourself. When you meet someone who's truly aligned with your authentic path, you won't need to ask if they're the one. Your entire being will relax into recognition. Not the desperate excitement of projection, but the quiet confidence of coming home to yourself in the presence of another. This is Jung's ultimate gift to our understanding of love. The recognition that authentic relationship begins with authentic selfhood. When you know yourself deeply and trust your own inner compass, you naturally attract and recognize others who are on a similar journey. You stop asking, "Are they the one?" because you become someone who only enters relationships where the answer is obviously yes. If this exploration has opened new perspectives on your own relationship patterns, I hope you'll take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. More importantly, I hope you'll have the courage to trust what your deeper self has always known about love. The path to authentic relationship isn't about finding someone to complete you. It's about becoming whole enough to recognize and appreciate wholeness in another. When that recognition occurs, you'll discover that the most profound love stories begin not with desperate questions but with quiet certainty. Your soul has always known the difference between settling and recognizing true compatibility. The question is, are you finally ready to trust what it's been trying to tell you?